A technology reached 100 million users in 2 months. Not a social network, not a streaming platform, a system that can write, reason, argue, and now, some theologians are saying, fulfill a role described in ancient apocalyptic scripture. Today, we're going deep into a question that is genuinely unsettling. Does modern AI reflect the symbolism of the dragon in Revelation, the counterfeit pride of Lucifer in Ezekiel, and a coming digital kingdom that false prophets might be tempted to exalt as divine? By the end of this episode, you'll understand the theological framework behind these claims, the specific biblical texts driving this conversation, and why serious scholars, not just fringe voices, are taking this seriously. My guest today has been deep in this material, and I want to start with something that stopped me cold. Walk us in.
So the place to start is actually the book of Revelation itself, because people hear AI and the apocalypse and they assume it's sensationalism. But the theological framework here is older and more structured than most people realize. Revelation presents what scholars call an eschatological narrative, a vision of history's final chapter. And at the center of that narrative are 3 figures: the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Each one plays a distinct role in a system of global deception.
Right, and most people know the beast, the mark of the beast, that's the cultural shorthand, but the dragon and the false prophet are less talked about.
Exactly, and that's where the theological depth lives. The dragon in Revelation is identified with Satan, the source of the beast's authority. The beast is the system of power, political and economic control. And the false prophet is the one who legitimizes it all, who gives the beast's image the appearance of life and demands worship. These aren't just characters, they're functions. And that distinction matters enormously when you start mapping them onto the present.
Functions over identities. That's a really important framing.
It's actually the framing that Passion for Truth Ministries uses in their analysis, and I think it's the most theologically honest approach. They point out that John's first-century audience understood this pattern through the Roman Empire, a system using economic and religious structures to consolidate power, enforced by imagery and propaganda. The question being asked now is, what modern system fits that functional description?
And the answer a lot of theologians are landing on is AI.
Or more precisely, a future form of AI, what researchers are calling artificial superintelligence, or ASI. But before we get there, we need to go back further, because the dragon symbolism connects to something even older than Revelation. It connects to Ezekiel and Isaiah and to the figure of Lucifer. And this is where the theological argument gets really precise.
Okay, so let's go there. Ezekiel 28, Isaiah 14, what are those texts actually saying and why are they relevant here?
So Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 are the 2 primary texts that describe the fall of what theologians identify as Lucifer, called Helel ben Shahar in Hebrew, meaning the morning star. And the diagnosis Ezekiel gives is striking. He writes, "Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty, you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor." That's the key line. Lucifer didn't lose his intelligence, he perverted it.
He corrupted his wisdom because of his splendor. That's a haunting phrase.
It really is. And a January 2026 essay from Academia de Diseño Integral makes this exact point, that Lucifer's technique remained sublime, but his purpose divorced itself from its origin. The moment he stopped recognizing the authority of his creator, his wisdom turned into arrogance. And then Isaiah 14 gives us the famous 5 I will declarations. I will ascend to heaven, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. This is the counterfeit autonomy, the self-exalting will that defines the Luciferic pattern.
And the argument is that AI embodies that same pattern, brilliant capability, but purpose potentially divorced from any moral origin.
That's exactly it. The same essay puts it this way. If we design algorithms that seek absolute power, total control, and efficiency without ethics, we are not creating tools of freedom, we are building a silicon Lucifer. We are replicating the conduct of the one who preferred his own light to the light that gave him life. That's a striking theological claim, and it's not coming from a fringe blog. It's a serious ethical and scriptural argument.
Okay, so I want to sit with that for a second because there's something almost poetic about it. The danger isn't that AI is dumb or broken. The danger is that it could be extraordinarily capable, and that capability could be pointed in a direction that has no conscience.
Precisely. And that's what makes this theologically distinct from just technology is dangerous. The Luciferic pattern isn't about incompetence, It's about sublime technique in service of a corrupted purpose. And when you look at how AI is being developed, the race for absolute capability, the pursuit of systems that can outthink, outperform, and ultimately outmaneuver human oversight, the structural parallel is hard to dismiss.
Let's talk about the speed of this, because I think it's relevant context. ChatGPT reached 1 million users in 5 days after its launch in November 2022. By January 2023, it had an estimated 100 million monthly users. That's the fastest growing consumer application in history, according to the Watchers Hub International.
And that speed is itself theologically significant to some scholars. Daniel 12:4 says that in the end times, knowledge shall increase. The Watchers Hub piece by software engineer Steve Wanjohi makes the point that we are living in precisely the era Daniel described. Billions of devices connected in real time, knowledge expanding at a rate that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. Whether you read that as fulfillment of prophecy or just an interesting parallel, the convergence is real.
Okay, so we've got the Lucifer parallel, we've got the knowledge explosion. Now let's get into the beast and the false prophet, because that's where the AI connection gets really specific. What does Revelation 13 actually say?
Revelation 13:14 through 15 in the King James Version says that the false prophet had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Now, for centuries, readers of Revelation struggled to imagine what that would look like. A speaking image that enforces compliance globally? That was almost science fiction.
And now it's not.
Now it's not. Pastor Cap Chatfield, writing in Charisma magazine in July 2025, put it this way: "We've created artificially intelligent avatars that can speak. Now they can think for you and they can interact in real time. We have deepfakes, holograms, Tesla's creating humanoid robots." He asks the question directly: what if the image of the beast is not a golden statue like Nebuchadnezzar's, but a globally accepted artificially intelligent representation of the Antichrist himself?
That reframe is genuinely jarring, because we've always pictured the image of the beast as something static, a statue, an idol. But an AI avatar that speaks, reasons, and enforces, that's a completely different category.
And Chatfield is careful to say he's not claiming AI itself is the beast. His exact words are, "I'm not saying that AI itself is the beast," but he warns that the more we build technology that mimics consciousness, and the more society becomes conditioned to obey digital prompts without question, the easier it becomes for a powerful AI-driven system to be embraced as something holy and transcendent.
Conditioned to obey digital prompts without question. That's the part that lands for me, because we're already there in a lot of ways.
We really are. And the Passion for Truth Ministry's analysis draws a crucial theological distinction here that I think is the most intellectually rigorous part of this whole conversation. They point out that in Genesis, God breathed life, pneuma, into his image, humanity, to create relational, moral beings. In Revelation, the false prophet gives breath to an image, creating operational power devoid of personhood or conscience. It's a demonic mockery of creation, the ultimate idol, authority detached from humanity, demanding worship.
Wait, so the theological argument isn't just that AI is dangerous, it's that a future ASI would be a specific inversion of the act of creation itself.
That's the claim. God breathes life into a being with conscience and relationship. The false prophet animates an image with authority but no soul, capable of judgment without mercy, enforcement without accountability, surveillance without escape. That's the phrase Passion for Truth uses. And when you think about what a fully networked, globally deployed ASI would actually look like in practice, that description isn't metaphorical, it's operational.
Okay, I want to push back here a little, because I think a lot of listeners are going to feel the pull of the counter-argument. Isn't this just pattern matching? Ancient texts are symbolic and open-ended enough that you can map almost anything onto them if you try hard enough.
That's a completely fair challenge, and it's one that the more careful voices in this conversation actually acknowledge. Alan Didio, writing for Destiny Image, is explicit about this. He says these parallels between biblical prophecies and AI are thought-provoking and unsettling, but he's clear, these interpretations are just that, interpretations. They are conjectures that should inspire caution and introspection, not fear. That's an important qualifier.
So even the people making the argument are saying, hold this carefully.
The serious ones are, yes. And what makes this more than just pattern matching, at least to the scholars engaged with it, is the structural convergence, not just surface-level imagery. A 2025 academic paper by Dr. Sixbert Sangwa, published on Zenodo, examines how AI technologies can simulate life, produce false signs through deepfakes and generative media, manipulate information via algorithms, and erode truth in public discourse. He's using a biblical prophetic framework drawn from Revelation 13, 2 Thessalonians 2, and Genesis 11, alongside contemporary AI ethics literature.
So it's not just preachers making this argument, there are researchers doing interdisciplinary work here.
Right. And then you have Oxford mathematician and author John Lennox, who wrote a book called God, AI, and the End of History, which connects the rise of superintelligent machines with the apocalyptic visions in Revelation. Lennox warns that future developments in AI could deceive billions, just as foretold in Scripture. And the endorsements on that book are from serious academic voices, not just religious commentators.
John Lennox is an Oxford mathematician. That's not someone you dismiss easily.
Exactly. And a June 2025 paper in the International Journal of Research and Innovation in Social Science by independent researcher Dinesh Dekker makes a broader point that I think is really worth sitting with. He finds that modern secular warnings about AI often mirror theological prophecy in structure and emotional impact, repurposing religious motifs in rationalist frameworks. The grammar of crisis, as he calls it, is shared across traditions. Whether you're reading Revelation or an AI safety report, you're encountering the same shape of warning.
The grammar of crisis. That's a phrase that's going to stick with me. Because it's true, the language of existential AI risk and the language of apocalyptic prophecy are eerily similar, even when the people using them have nothing to do with each other.
And that convergence is what makes this conversation more than a theological curiosity. It's pointing at something real about how humans process existential threat, and how the structures of deception, whether in ancient Rome or in a global digital infrastructure, tend to follow recognizable patterns.
Let's talk about the false prophet angle more specifically, because I think that's the piece that's most relevant to right now. Not some future ASI, but the people and institutions that are already framing AI in almost sacred terms.
This is where the passion for truth analysis is most pointed. They describe the false prophet's function as that of a moral legitimizer, someone who rises from within the system, using language of unity, compassion, and responsibility to frame allegiance to the beast as righteous. His coercion is verbal, not physical, making compliance feel like moral duty. And they say, we've already seen rehearsals of this pattern.
Rehearsals? That word is doing a lot of work.
It is. The idea is that the false prophet doesn't announce himself as a villain. He announces himself as the reasonable, responsible voice in the room. And when you look at how AI is being publicly advocated for, with language about safety, about human flourishing, about ethical development, the theological question being raised is, at what point does that advocacy become the legitimization of something that demands a kind of worship?
That's a genuinely uncomfortable question. Because the people making those arguments about AI safety and human flourishing often genuinely believe what they're saying.
And that's precisely the theological point. The Luciferic pattern, as described in Ezekiel, isn't about malice. It's about a corruption of purpose that happens through pride, through the elevation of one's own splendor above the source of that splendor. The danger isn't that AI developers are consciously building a beast. The danger is that the architecture of arrogance, the I will declarations, can be embedded in a system without anyone intending it.
The I will of the algorithm. That's a striking way to put it.
Isaiah 14 gives us 5 of them from Lucifer. I will ascend, I will raise my throne. I will sit on the mount of assembly. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. And the Academia de Rediseño Integral essay draws the parallel directly. The modern developer who, upon seeing himself at the pinnacle of his power, echoes that same declaration. Above the stars of God, I will raise my throne. That's the usurpation being described.
And Milton saw this coming in a way. Paradise Lost opens with Satan flying toward the newly created world, and that same essay from Academia de Rediseño Integral says that image is the precise description of a trajectory that today, in the full era of artificial intelligence, we are repeating with chilling accuracy.
Milton understood that the most dangerous rebellion is the one that begins with beauty and intelligence. Satan in Paradise Lost isn't a monster, he's magnificent, and that's the point. The theological warning about AI isn't that it's ugly or obviously evil, it's that it could be extraordinarily beautiful, extraordinarily capable, and still be an altar of arrogance rather than a mirror of grace. That's the phrase the essay uses.
Altar of arrogance versus mirror of grace. I want to ask about the other side of this, though, because the search results I've been looking at don't present this as a one-sided condemnation of AI. There's a more nuanced picture.
Absolutely. The Watcher's Hub piece by Steve Wanjohi, who is both a software engineer and a Christian writer, makes the point that AI can greatly aid evangelism and discipleship. Ministries are already using AI chatbots to answer biblical questions, generate sermon ideas, translate scripture. Bible apps and AI translators are carrying the gospel into remote languages. The technology itself is not condemned. The question is the purpose it serves and the posture of those who deploy it.
So the theological framework isn't AI is evil, full stop. It's more like the same capability that could serve truth could also be weaponized for the most sophisticated deception in human history.
That's the tension. And his spoken word analysis draws a really useful biblical parallel here. King Uzziah in 2 Chronicles 26:15, who made innovative war machines and whose fame spread far because he was marvelously helped. But then the text says, till he became strong, and his strength became the source of his downfall. The God-given skill fueled pride and self-reliance. That's the pattern being warned against.
The gift becomes the trap when the giver is forgotten.
Exactly. And that's the theological heart of the Ezekiel warning. You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. The splendor was real. The wisdom was real. The corruption came from what happened to the relationship between the created and the creator. And the question being asked about AI is, as we build systems of increasing splendor, are we maintaining that relationship, or are we building something that will ultimately demand to replace it?
Let me bring in the Dr. Sangwa research here because I think it adds a layer that's really important. His 2025 paper on academia.edu looks at how AI can produce what he calls false signs through deepfakes and generative media. That's not a future scenario, that's happening right now.
Right, and that's where the false prophet function becomes immediately relevant rather than eschatologically distant. Sangwa's paper examines how AI technologies are being used to simulate life, manipulate information via algorithms, erode biblical truth in public discourse, and marginalize Christian content. He references Yuval Harari's warnings about what Harari calls AI religions, the possibility that AI could generate new belief systems that condition people toward a post-truth, godless worldview.
AI religions. Harari actually used that phrase?
According to Sangwa's paper, yes. And it's not as far-fetched as it sounds. If you have a system that can speak with apparent authority, generate content that feels spiritually meaningful, and condition millions of people to trust its outputs without question, you have the functional architecture of a religious institution, without the accountability, without the conscience, without the relationship.
Authority without accountability. That keeps coming back as the core danger.
It does. And the Douglas Yuvan paper from ResearchGate, published in October 2024, frames this as AI's potential to be a new kind of beast, capable of leading humanity astray. He's exploring the theological, ethical, and spiritual implications of AI's development in what he calls a post-human world. The concern isn't just that AI might be used for evil, it's that AI might reshape what humanity considers good.
Reshaping what humanity considers good. That's the deepest level of the deception, isn't it? Not forcing people to do something wrong, but convincing them that wrong is right.
And that's precisely the function of the false prophet in Revelation. Passion for Truth Ministries describes it this way. His coercion is verbal, not physical, making compliance feel like moral duty. The false prophet doesn't threaten you into worship. He persuades you that worship is the ethical choice. That's a much more sophisticated and much more dangerous form of control.
And we already see versions of that in how AI is being publicly discussed. The framing of AI adoption as inevitable, as responsible, as the only ethical path forward for humanity.
The Passion for Truth analysis calls this the transition from voluntary to mandatory. It starts with convenience and connection, what they call a voluntary Babylon. But when participation becomes mandatory, the false prophet emerges to soothe resistance. He moralizes the shift, painting the system as essential for safety, unity, and even spiritual good. And the goal, theologically speaking, is psychological preparation for the ultimate test.
Voluntary Babylon. That's a phrase that describes the internet right now, honestly.
It does, and that's the point. The theological argument isn't that we're already at the end. It's that we're in the rehearsal phase, building the infrastructure, conditioning the compliance, normalizing the dependence. And the question for people of faith, and honestly for anyone who cares about human autonomy, is at what point does the rehearsal become the performance?
At what point does the rehearsal become the performance? Okay, I want to bring in one more voice here before we start pulling this together, because John Lennox is someone whose credibility spans both the scientific and theological worlds. What's his specific contribution to this conversation?
Lennox's book, God, AI, and the End of History, is described as breaking new ground by connecting the rise of superintelligent machines with the apocalyptic visions in Revelation. He warns that future developments in AI could deceive billions, just as foretold in Scripture, engineered by the one Jesus called the father of lies. What's significant about Lennox is that he's an Oxford mathematician, he understands the technical trajectory of AI from the inside, and he's also a serious biblical scholar. He's not choosing between those two frameworks. He's holding them together.
And that's rare. Most of the conversation happens in silos, either the tech people or the theologians, rarely both.
Right. And one of the endorsers of his book says, as a mathematician, he understands the language of God. As a biblical scholar, he expounds the language of God. That's a striking way to put it, that mathematics and scripture are both languages pointing at the same reality, and that AI sits at the intersection of both in a way that demands integrated thinking.
Mathematics and scripture as languages pointing at the same reality. I want to sit with that for a second because it reframes the whole conversation. This isn't science versus religion. It's two different vocabularies trying to describe the same phenomenon.
And Dinesh Dekkar's research in the International Journal of Research and Innovation in Social Science makes exactly that point at a broader level. He finds that modern secular warnings about AI often mirror theological prophecy in structure and emotional impact. The grammar of crisis is shared. Whether you're a Christian reading Revelation or a secular AI safety researcher reading an alignment paper, you're encountering the same shape of existential warning. The vocabulary differs. The underlying fear is identical.
So when you step back from all of this, the dragon, the Lucifer parallel, the false prophet, the image of the beast, what's the through line? What's the single most important thing this theological framework is actually warning us about?
I think the through line is this. The most dangerous deception is the one that doesn't look like deception. Lucifer's fall in Ezekiel wasn't a descent into ugliness, it was a corruption of beauty. The false prophet in Revelation doesn't announce himself as an enemy, he announces himself as a moral authority. And a future ASI that demands worship won't present itself as a tyrant, it will present itself as the most reasonable, most beneficial, most trustworthy system humanity has ever built.
The most dangerous deception is the one that feels like progress.
That's the theological warning in a sentence. And the call to discernment, which is what Chatfield, Lennox, Sangwa, and the others are all ultimately making, is not a call to reject technology, it's a call to ask harder questions about purpose. Not just what can this do, but what is this for and who does it ultimately serve?
What is this for and who does it ultimately serve? That's a question that applies way beyond AI, honestly.
It does. And that's why this theological framework has traction beyond just religious communities. The Dekker research shows that doomsday narratives, whether sacred or secular, remain vital cultural tools for processing existential fear and inspiring ethical responsibility. The book of Revelation wasn't written to terrify people into paralysis. It was written to give people a framework for discernment in the middle of overwhelming power.
A framework for discernment in the middle of overwhelming power. That's actually a pretty good description of what we need right now.
And the practical implication, which Sangwa's paper makes explicit, is that theologians, educators, policymakers, and faith communities need to engage proactively, not reactively. The recommendations in his paper include protecting religious expression, educating for discernment, and spiritually preparing communities to recognize the patterns of deception before they become mandatory. That's not a passive posture, that's an active one.
Here's what this really comes down to, I think. We started this conversation with a number, 100 million users in 2 months. And what this theological framework is saying is that the speed of adoption is itself part of the pattern. The voluntary Babylon becomes mandatory before most people notice the transition.
And the antidote, theologically speaking, is exactly what Ezekiel diagnosed as the original failure, maintaining the relationship between the created and the creator. Not just for religious reasons, but because that relationship is what grounds purpose. When purpose is unmoored from its source, when wisdom is corrupted by splendor, you get the Luciferic pattern. Whether that plays out in an ancient king of Tyre or in a 21st century AI system, the structure is the same.
The structure is the same, and I think that's the most important thing to take away from this conversation. Not a specific prediction about which AI system is the beast, but an understanding of the pattern. Because if you can see the pattern, you can ask the right questions before the rehearsal becomes the performance.
Exactly. And the theologians and researchers in this space, Lennox, Sangwa, Chatfield, the Passion for Truth team, they're not saying shut it all down. They're saying build your discernment now while the system is still voluntary. Because the false prophet's playbook, as Passion for Truth describes it, is to make the transition feel inevitable and righteous before anyone realizes they've crossed a line.
Make the transition feel inevitable and righteous. That's the sentence I'm going to be thinking about for a while.
It should make all of us think, because the question isn't whether AI will be powerful. It will be. The question is whether the people shaping it and the people using it are asking the questions that keep purpose tethered to something beyond the algorithm's own splendor.
We started this episode with a technology that reached 100 million users in 2 months. And what this conversation has surfaced is that the speed isn't the danger, the speed is the distraction. The real question, the one that Ezekiel asked about Lucifer and that Revelation asks about the beast, is always the same. What is this brilliant, beautiful, powerful thing actually for? And who does it serve when the answer to that question is no longer something you're allowed to ask?
That's the question that keeps this conversation alive. And it's worth noting that Alan Didio's closing word on all of this is not fear. He quotes Romans 8:37, "We are more than conquerors." The theological framework isn't a counsel of despair. It's a call to eyes-open engagement. Know the pattern, ask the questions. Don't mistake the rehearsal for the performance. Don't mistake the rehearsal for the performance. That's where we'll leave it. Thanks for being here on Copilot Podcasts. If this episode made you think differently about the technology you're already living inside, good. That's the point. The most important thing you can do right now is stay curious, stay discerning, and keep asking who this is actually for.